Hello, serfs and mere mortals. This video is going to explain why you all are so low. You're so low. You're so very low. And some people are high. I've been telling you for months that I'm so much higher than you. Why am I higher than you? Well, one reason I'm a descendant of the chosen ones. And we are higher than everybody else. The other reason is that I'm an enlightened being, and enlightened beings are vastly more conscious than the non-enlightened beings because they're unconscious. You see, that's why I'm so much higher, and you're low. You see how much lower you are? Low. You're down there, lowly, mere serfs. You see, that's how it's always been, and that it is how it still is. Now, I could point you in the direction of educational videos which would show you how the world has been run for thousands of years with this hierarchical system of bloodlines and how the whole world are related in their bloodlines. And most certainly all the bloodlines in Europe can be followed back to the furthest origin of being kings and queens and divine leaders. Now, when a king or queen becomes inaugurated, it is under the jurisdiction and will of God, and they are effectively anointed by God over the masses. And so you could say that the monarchs are the emissaries of God. And indeed, they come under the jurisdiction of God. Now, if you ever see a crown, and crowns from all over Europe have been like this since Lord knows how long, but if you did your research, you could find out. But you get the crown, the gold crown, and invariably it's got some sort of spiky thing going on, triangles or prongs or something like that. Well, that is indicative of the crown of thorns of Christ. And then on top of that, you have a round ball, yeah? Well, that is the world. And then top of that, you have a cross, and that is Christianity. So you've got Christianity, God ruling over the world, and the symbol of the crown of thorns of Jesus' sacrifice for humanity. And so these royals, who have been supposedly anointed by God, take upon that jurisdiction and have leverage over the masses. Now, so if we want to know what these words mean and where they derive from, we can look on Wikipedia for what it's worth, but I would always encourage you to look deeper than Wikipedia. But just for the purpose of this video, it says here, Royal Highness is a style used to address or refer to some members of royal families, usually princes or princesses. Now, let us have a look for clarity what style means. A particular procedure or by which something is done, a manner or way. Now, most people these days would consider that a style has something to do with how you have your hair or your fashion and some things like that. But you can see from this description, it's something deeper, something more meaningful, a particular procedure by which something is done. And so the royals always have their pageantry, don't they? They have a particular procedure, a style which they all adhere to. Now, let's just go back to the explanation here. Royal Highness is a style used to address or refer to some members of the royal families, usually princes or princesses, kings and their female consorts, as well as queens. Regnant are usually styled Majesty. These annoying notifications all the time. When used as a direct form of address, spoken or written, it takes the form of Your Royal Highness. When used as a third-person reference, it is gender-specific, His Royal Highness or Her Royal Highness, both abbreviated to HRH. Origin. By the 17th century, all local rulers in Italy adopted the style Highness, which was once used by kings and emperors only. According to Denis Diderot's Encyclopédie, the style of Royal Highness was created on the insistence of Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, Cardinal Infant of Spain, a younger son of King Philip III of Spain. The Archduke was travelling through Italy on his way to the Low Countries, and upon meeting Victor Amadeus, Duke of Savoy, who refused to address him as Highness unless the Duke addressed him as Royal Highness. Thus, the first use of the style Royal Highness was recorded in 1663. So let us now have a look at the etymology of royal. The word royal comes from the Latin regalis, meaning kingly, which derives from rex, meaning king. This root was adopted into Old French as royal and then passed into Middle English as royal. The English word royal is a doublet of regal because both words share the same Latin origin. Now, when we go back to this highness business, well, in this description here, it's indicating that Royal Highness became prevalent, blah, 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 from King Ferdinand because he met someone from the lower lands. Now, King Ferdinand coming from the higher lands, well, whenever you, in the past, you'd have a king's residence, a castle, well, it would be on the highest point, wouldn't it? Looking down over the minions. And everybody would be looking up at the stately castle, this huge, powerful building. And, you know, it's very much like the Tower of Babel, where mere mortals were building a township like a tiered wedding cake going up to the heavens, and God struck them all with a different tongue so they could never understand one another and conspire any such nonsense ever again. So kings, well, they did a very similar thing, didn't they? They found the highest point in any given land which was feasible, so the entourage could come and go. You know, it's not like building a castle on the top of a fucking mountain, completely impractical. You've got to get water and foodstuffs and all the rest of it. So you take a position on a hill, and it overlooks the land for a large expanse because a king and his entourage would want to see to the horizon if possible. That way, they would get the greatest time to see oncoming invaders. They wouldn't build their castle obscured by mountains or other hills so they couldn't see barely than a few miles. That would never do. So they'd pick these high points, and so they would have a highness. And so they would become His Highness. Then the royal thing came into it because of the regality. So then we have the Royal Highness. And let us go down now. They've got the Belgium and the Netherlands and Norway and Spain, Sweden. Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom. In British constitutional law, use of the style His Royal Highness, Her Royal Highness, or simply Royal Highness may only be conferred by letters patent. Since 1917, the style has usually been restricted to children of the monarch or to male line grandchildren, i.e., the children of the monarch's sons. It is typically associated with the rank of prince or princess, although this has not always applied, an exception being Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who received the style in 1947 prior to his marriage to Princess Elizabeth, but was not formally created a British prince until 1957, 10 years later, when a prince has another title such as Duke or Princess, the title of Duchess, they may be called His or Her Royal Highness, the Duke of. And so you can see that this style thing has come about, and you can see one instantiation of the origin. Now, I'm pretty sure that we could read older literature because it's very important not to believe anything that you read on Wikipedia. And from what I know about all this stuff, going back through the ancient bloodlines, I've seen many, many documentaries about the ancient bloodlines going back to Egypt and further. And we know today, well, it's all documented in relation to like there were 13 countries in the European realm, dating back some hundreds of years. And I think something like in 1700s or something like that, it was documented. And there were photos taken of all the monarchs, um, uh, like Germany and Britain and Belgium and Italy and Spain, and these sort of prominent, which are now European countries. Well, they all had a family lineage, and of course, the royals always wanted to marry into another royal family for their own protection and authority, because if they never had the family kinship, then there'll be no blood between them, and so why would they feel that like they have any kinship to one another? But if a member of the British royal family married into the German royal family, which they did, the Windsors were not too long ago called the Habsburgs, and they were of German origin. And then, doubtless, the German origin pertained to Rome, because lots of these rulers came out of Rome. And that's why they went under the jurisdiction of the Roman Catholicism. So you can follow all this stuff back, and it's very, very interesting. But you can go even further back to the times of the Egyptian pharaohs. And there are photos of, or paintings, let's say paintings, oil paintings of monarchs of a few hundred years ago, which had very peculiar faces, very inbred faces, and lots of them looked the same, whether they were King of Belgium, King of Spain, King of Italy. They're all interbred. They're all sharing the same genetic bowl of genetics, DNA. And so you get this inbreeding stuff. And one of the prime examples of this is with King Tutankhamun, with his father and his mother. Now, I think his mother was Nefertiti and his father was Akhenaten. They both had this very, very broad hip thing going on. And it was some sort of disease, illness, and speculated to have came about by inbreeding, because it's a very curious thing that you don't see anywhere around the world today, at least to my knowledge. So you've got all these lineages, and they all derive from people in positions of power who considered that they were anointed by God or by entities. And, there's lots to be said, people, for entities not of this earth, i.e., the Anunnaki. And then you've got the Nephilim in the Bible. You've got the Watchers, you've got the Archons, you've got all these varieties of non-earthly beings which have been documented for thousands of years. And so it's all very, very interesting stuff. And then down in Peru, in Caracas, or I think it's Paracas. Caracas is the capital, but I think this city called Paracas with a P. There are these elongated skulls which are not human, and then you can see the elongated skull on Tutankhamun and Nefertiti and Akhenaten, and they hide it under this elongated headdress. And for those of you that have ever been into the Cairo Museum and you've seen the mummies of that period, you will notice that a high proportion of them are red-haired. And the red-haired thing, then, you can find evidence of that on these giant stones on Easter Island, because these giant stones of 30 feet tall had a crowning of a red coral type stone, which historians have no idea where that came from, but it most certainly didn't come from the island. So it was imported somehow. And these stones were huge, like 2 meters across by 1.5 meters deep, like huge counters which used to be placed on top of the head of these stone entities. Why? Why did they go to all those lengths to put that red capping stone on top? Because the origin of these cone heads was red-haired. And you can see red and blonde-haired cone heads in Paracas. Now, so we've got all that stuff going on, and then let us continue.
World mythology and ancestral narratives speak of an ET layer to the governance of human society. But are the Sumerian sky people, the Hebrew Elohim, the Egyptian Akhek, Dogon's Nomos, or the Babylonian Apkallu still present? Are today's close encounters and possible covert treaties with the same powers that our ancestors described from the deep past?
One of the things that might suggest that is the continuity of elites on planet Earth. Elite families that have been at the top of the tree of human society for a very, very long time. When I was a little boy, I was read a story called The Princess and the Pea. The point of the story is that a prince or a king or a queen cannot possibly marry and breed with an ordinary human being. This is anathema. And you listen to the royal stories of any culture around the world, they're very, very careful to maintain the purity of their bloodline. So
now this guy knows what he's talking about. He's very well studied. And the channel's called The Fifth Kind. And he has 1.18 million subscribers. So he's not just some two-bit dude, and he was a Christian minister for 30 years until he realized that all of the stories, or many of the stories in the Old Testament, were pertaining to these such things. So now his channel depicts all this different sort of stuff, which is absolutely fascinating.
So that royals never marry ordinary human beings. And in the past, this has thrown up huge problems because of a narrow gene pool. Around the time of King Henry VIII, some of the kings and queens of Europe looked very, very odd indeed because they were suffering the disadvantages of breeding within the family line. But it was the outcome of a policy that says you have to keep royal bloodlines pure, you can't breed with ordinary human beings. Well, where on earth does that come from? What it really comes from is a desire to keep power in the hands of a very few families.
In 1910, a photograph was taken which included the royal heads of state of 9 independent sovereign nations: Norway, Bulgaria, Portugal, Germany and Prussia, Greece, Belgium, Spain, Denmark, and the UK. They are all members of one extended family, every one related directly or by marriage to one John William Friso.
So you've got 9 countries that think they are independent sovereign nations, but they're being run by a single family. How do you make sense of that? I read a book by Jeremy Paxman that talks about the political history of Great Britain. Friends in High Places, it's called. And what Jeremy Paxman demonstrates, and he's a mainstream broadcaster, he was the anchor man for Newsnight for 30 odd years in the UK. And he demonstrates that Great Britain, over 500 years, went through the Reformation, had a revolution, had democratic revolutionary legislation brought in to extend the franchise to everybody, to turn Britain into a democracy, went through 2 world wars. And yet with all these huge seismic changes, it's still the same 5 families running Britain who ran it 500 years ago. How is this possible? For me, the persistence hints at the possibility that they are maintaining a power structure that was established thousands of years ago.
For generations, we've been handed a version of history, neat, polished, and safe, especially for the conquerors. And we've been told that our ancestors were unintelligent and worshipped imaginary gods, and that stories of beings from the sky were superstition, and that the extraordinary is simply impossible. But when you start to look more closely, you find that those stories have been shaped, edited, and even suppressed. So often the wisdom of our ancestors has been ignored or distorted or simply misunderstood. It's been turned into religion or demeaned or deliberately destroyed.
Now you can see this video is called Bloodlines and Aliens, the history they don't want you to know. Paul Wallace of the Fifth Kind. Now I won't play any more of this. You can watch it yourselves if you so desire. But there's something over and above this which I have how can I say, I have learnt or I have always known. I have gained awareness of, put the pieces together of, or have had this information given to me by the language and portal of God, which is intuition. But what I'm saying to you now is, people, and what I've been saying a long time, and I'm always being facetious and I'm always being confrontatory and always giving you the opportunity to express yourself, express your ego, and reveal the silly things that you still have an adherence to. But what is going on and what has always been going on is these human beings, let's just call them human beings, they may have a little bit of a different DNA, but most certainly they have kept their DNA as pure as they possibly can. Now, this is a trait of the chosen ones, because invariably they do not want, and they will throw anybody out of the clan who marries outside of what is known as Jewry. They've got to keep the blood within that particular pool, because if it goes outside and gets weakened and watered down, then the people who are descendants of the you-know-whos, which have mixed with the Goyim, then they are no longer pure. And you would see during the time of the Second World War, when the powers that be at that time were looking at the lineage and ancestry of peoples, and they had very, very tight criteria as to who they were looking for. And they were looking for the purest of the bloodline. And if you were like second, third, fourth generations removed from that bloodline, then you would escape uh, the intentions of that particular regime at the time. And so they knew that there is something in the family. And of course, anyone that's been a historian or looked into this stuff knows. And there's a massive conspiracy to try to make out it's all fake. It absolutely isn't fake. Why is it that the you-know-whos have their fingers in pies all over the world? They always have had, and they have always at some time been extricated or purged or abolished from all the nations which they went in and created some variety of infestation. And so this has always been known. And so, what I'm saying here is that how was it that these people originally came to have these positions of power, which were supposedly anointed upon them via God? What God? Well, that's a matter of contestation, because if we delve deeply into the Old Testament, then we will see without any uncertain terms that Yahweh is a demiurge. Yahweh isn't the creator of the cosmos and Lord of Lords. Most certainly is not. And even in the Bible, it's always speaking about Elohim, and Elohim means gods. And even in the book of Genesis, it was said that Adam and Eve should not eat from the forbidden fruit, because if they did, they will become like us. It says that there's no denying that, and no biblical writers have ever tried to eradicate that. And so they've always known what's going on here. And there's many instances in the Old Testament which speak about very bizarre things, which could only mean other entities from another planet and extraterrestrial flying objects and superpowers and all different things like this. And if you're really interested in that, some of you maybe you are, some of you maybe haven't been looking into this stuff a long time. But for those of you that are probably, I don't know what to say, not very broad in what you have investigated, some of this stuff will be absurd to you. But the more you get into it, the more you'll realize that the only thing which is absurd is the narrow parameters of the human consciousness. After all this time, it's absolutely absurd that they are still absolutely dumbed down automaton, just how they were created to be. And so when you look at it like that, you think, well, these beings from another constellation or dimension, they really did the job on the so-called Homo sapiens, the pink ape, because there's very, very few which will ever escape that jurisdiction and that genetic programming. And as to why I've escaped it, well, it could just be the path I've travelled, or it could just be that I was never destined to be under the yoke of these people, because I am from a certain bloodline. And so when you are from a certain bloodline, you have a certain level of consciousness. And that level of consciousness doesn't permit you to become subject to the yoke of suppression, slavery, and all the rest of it, because you just know too much. And the the people that try to do that and do that, well, they recognize you as being one of them, and so they leave you alone. So let's just go back now a little bit further. These descendants of the gods, they have kept this bloodline going, and they've kept the knowledge secret. Now, what is it that they knew? Well, there's lots of things that they could have known about parallel dimensions and different, vastly different states of consciousness and superpowers and all different sorts of things, and knowing about varying entities within this realm. I mean, there's lots of them. There's archons. There's the Anunnaki. There's the Nephilim. There's the Watchers. There are the Avians. Then there's the Nordics, and Pleiadians, and the Greys, and you can just go on and on and on with all these varieties. Where did they come from? They came out of our history, people. And in the Old Testament, there are these stories which depict lots of these things, which can only mean these things. It's got nothing, these stories have got nothing to do with you benefiting in any shape or form. They are exercises of power over the peoples of the time, whom considered to be gods because of their powers. Now, I say facetiously and very, very seriously that I'm higher than you. I'm higher than you. Look how high I am. That's the facetious part of it. But there's a truth in there, people. And all the things I've been conveying to you over the years have been coming from my higher state of consciousness. And for those of you that can encroach on the depth and breadth of my consciousness, then you wouldn't be considering that I'm mad. You would be in the same or similar state of conscious vibration. Because whenever I'm doing any of my videos, and I could be clowning around and I could be being facetious, that's joking for mere mortals. It's joking. When I'm doing this, when I'm engaging in satire, every single thing I say is rooted in a reality, or so-called reality, on this earth. And I can speak about burnt offerings to Jehovah when I'm doing my cooking, and why did Jehovah find the smoke of burnt flesh so pleasing? Well, what sort of entity would find that pleasing? Do you think the creator of the cosmos would find the smoke of a burnt animal pleasing, or do you think he'd have higher things to concentrate on? He'd have higher things which pleased him, if indeed he even needed pleasing at all. And so, what was it that needed pleasing by burnt offerings? What was it that needed this level of devotion and structure and dedication and ritual? What was it that brought that about? Seems to me no god would require that. Something lower than the god of the cosmos would require that, and that position would be filled by any number of demiurge who, throughout the millennia, throughout hundreds of thousands of years, have been vying for supremacy on this earth. Now, what is it that enables me to look into these things and to know these things to be true intuitively, even before I've ever got round to reading about them or listening to them? It's a level of consciousness that I was born into. So this is why I've been a very different creature all of my life. And this is why when I'm playing these games, I'm playing Earth games, going to see therapists and psychiatrists. And some people would say to me, "Oh, you don't need these, Aaron. You don't need these people." Goodness me, I'm so much higher than them. I'm so much higher. I'm so much higher. Don't you see it? And then people say, "Oh, they might put you, in an institution. They might lock you up." Really? Well, this is the level of fear people are under. You see, because they don't have the power. I have the power, and I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm going to get exactly what I want because I'm from that ilk which always gets what it wants. Because somewhere in that lineage of the power structure, uh, there is a knowing, there's an underlying knowing that people like me cannot be messed with. And so they don't know that until you present it to them. So you have to present it to them. And I've presented things to power structures all my life, and they've bowed out. They gracefully bow out, and they never tell you why they're bowing out. They just bow out, and you get what you're seeking because they know that you are one of them, one of the HIGHness. You see, now you may think that I'm speaking complete nonsense, and you may very well want to hate me for that, and that's your prerogative. But those of you that think a little bit like me, then you'll start to think, I've always kind of known that. I mean, the Awakened Brave is very articulate, intelligent, and well resourced, and things like that, and I'm not really, but I kind of like, I'm cut from the same cloth. There's some of you out there who are cut from the same cloth, but your time isn't now. Your time may come. It may not come this time around, but certain experiences have to come about. And when I speak about the archetypes which have presented themselves to me, these archetypes of the Western world, the Yahweh, the Jesus, the Satan, and the angels. These are very, very predominantly Western oriented. I never was presented with any of the Egyptian gods like Isis or let's say. Who's described Thoth. I've never seen Thoth. I wish I would see Thoth. I wish I had an affinity with Thoth in this reality. But my affinity with Thoth is that I am one of his descendants, but in a different culture, and so I get spoken to from a different culture because it's kind of like this spiritual stuff, people. Um, when we are born and bred into a certain lineage of culture, then whenever you need a message from the archetypes, you will get one which pertains to your particular culture. You don't invariably, I would think, haven't heard of any stories where this has happened. Why would I have an Egyptian archetype come to give me a message? Why would I have an Indian one or a Japanese one or a Chinese one? Because those archetypes are not in my culture and they're not in my blood, and I would find it more difficult to comprehend their message than I would archetypes from a culture that I was born into. And so when I have Jesus give me a message, I understand it. When I have Yahweh give me a message, I understand it. When Satan gives me a message, I understand it. When angels give me riddles that I must work out, I will work them out. But if I had Ganesh with all his arms or whatever it fucking is going on, who's Ganesh? It's the elephant. Is Ganesh the elephant? The elephant, isn't it? And then what's the one with all the arms, like Medusa? You see, I don't even know anything about them because I've never been drawn to knowing. I've never been told consciously that I need to know about those. My consciousness is drawn in very, very specific realms. And these realms pertain to this northern hemisphere of collective unconsciousness. You see, maybe my ancestors, my forebears that go back thousands of years, they all pertained, from this realm. And this is why I know that I've got Viking blood, and of course Anglo-Saxon and Jewish blood, and all the rest of it. But I haven't any inclination of having any Japanese blood or Indian or African. No. And so, therefore, then, when the archetypes come to present a message to me, they come in a form which they know that they can relate to me on. Now, on one occasion, I was speaking to a pastor during a period of my incarceration. I said to him, so how, let's just say, if God was going to be communicating with me, how would he do that? And he said he will do that by any way in which he knows he can. And I'm like, wow, that was a very, very good answer. Because one day before, and the reason why I asked this is because I had a communication from God, from Yahweh. And this communication told me exactly what I wanted to know. And it was such an incredible thing. And I've wrote about it in my incredible spiritual Bible. You see, that book is a condensation of my life, primarily through 14 years, but it goes back to my childhood. And my consciousness wrote that book. The higher self wrote that book and explained what was necessary to explain. But that book, you see, because it pertains to such depth and such a lineage of ancestral consciousness, it's very, very difficult to perceive. It's like the Bible itself. You have to be a scholar. You have to know history. You have to know psychology. You have to know religion. You have to know spirituality. You've got to know so many things. You've got to be an old soul. You've got to have so many experiences of different dimensions of consciousness. Otherwise, that book will just be like the Beano or any other fucking superhero comic book that you're gonna, because it's a superhero experience, people. And there's been many, many phenomenological experiences which I've had. So, anyway, just to bring to your attention, those of you that are remotely suspect or subject to it, those of you that are open to it, those of you that can receive the vibration, the vast majority of you won't. And so this video probably is only for one person, maybe a couple of people, and maybe you click with a few lines in it. You wouldn't even click with the whole context of it, and probably you've even forgotten what the context was about, and you'd need to go back and listen to it again and again and again, because there's so much depth to these things. And then just to know about these 9 heads of state, and they pertained to the same lineage of blood, which goes back thousands of years. Well, you can spend your whole life investigating that alone. But if you spent a few weeks at least investigating it, then you'll start to get some sort of idea of what the fuck's been going on this planet. I'll leave you with that.